is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 328. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line with internet all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, is it holding up?
It is. I had to gracefully, or maybe not so gracefully, bow out of the Streamers Showdown earlier because my internet died in pick 2.
Yeah, that's a super bummer. I actually tried to tune in to watch you draft, but by the time I got there, you were already hosting Gabby, and I got to watch her draft an insane deck instead.
Well, yeah, she 3-0'd the Streamer Showdown and would have beaten me very easily even if I drafted a normal deck. But
yes,
moral of the story: internet went down. Is no longer down. The resource is no longer limited. So let's do a show.
Okay, so we've got the Oath of the Gatewatch Sunset Show this week. We know how much you guys like the sunsets. Looking back on the cards and the set as we sort of transition away into the land of Shadows Over Innistrad. And speaking of that, we've also got our exclusive Limited Resources Shadows Over Innistrad preview cards that we're going to go after we're done with the regular sunset. We're doing chronological here. And so it should be a good, fun show. Sit back, relax, grab yourself a cold beverage, and let's talk Oath of the Gatewatch. Before we get into all of it, I want to remind you about our sponsor, ChannelFireball.com. Sponsors the show each and every week. You can head over to Channel Fireball for all of your Magic needs. That's right. If you need anything Magic related, go to Channel Fireball. You're going to find it. You want to sell your cards, you can sell them there. You want to buy cards, you can buy them. You want to buy sealed product, you want to get apparel, you want to get sleeves, play mats, whatever it is you need, you're going to find it at Channel Fireball. And while you're there, check out some of the awesome free content. You're going to find articles, podcasts like this one, videos from some of the best players in the world, all with one goal: make you better at Magic. We know that that's why you come here to listen to Limited Resources, and you can go to Channel Fireball to supplement that as well. Highly recommended. If you want to support the show directly, you can do so via the Patreon. That's patreon.com/limited resources. It's real easy. You go there, you say how much you want to give per show. It can be any amount. It can be $1. It doesn't matter. And you'll get a thank you card in the mail as part of that, which is cool. And you also get some cool perks. One of them is that you're eligible for giveaways. And I've actually got a giveaway here. I'm going to do another one next week too. I've got in my hands a water bottle. I got it at the Pro Tour. It's got Jace on it and the Planeswalker logo, and it's a really
sounded like you're dragging a crowbar against a pipe.
No, there's inside there's the instructions for how to use the water bottle somehow, even though it's really, just here, I can talk into it. Do I sound different? And
yeah,
I did, right? Yeah. Anyway, and it's a really nice, Planeswalker labeled water bottle there. And I'm going to give that one away right now to Christopher Meager. Chris, thanks so much. He's from San Diego, California. And I'm going to be shipping you that along with.
So would you call a water bottle a meager prize then?
No, I think it's really cool, actually. It's one that you can, use
a prize day. For Christopher Meager.
Yeah, well, that it is for sure. Yeah, in this case. And Chris, I'm also going to give you some Channel Fireball sleeves and a deck box. We got those from CFB to give away on the show. Just another one of the cool perks of having a great site like Channel Fireball as our sponsor. So I'll be sending that off to you next week. Thank you so much for your support, Chris. Also, if you're on the Patreon, you get to submit questions for the Patreon question of the week. This one comes from Brett Bookbinder, who says, real simple and pertinent to this episode: how important is spoiler season in regards to judging the playability of cards? What do you think, Luis? When you're going through spoiler season, it's kind of hard to piece it all together just based on a few cards, right?
So I do look at spoilers. I mean, whenever a new card comes out, I tend to look at it. Maybe I'll miss a couple here and there, but I do like looking at them. That being said, it's just not that useful. Like, sure, you can tell that a card, like if Oblivion Strike, were one of the cards spoiled, 4-mana exile a creature. You can look at that, and you don't have to know anything about the limited format to know this is going to be a pretty good card.
Mm-hmm.
It's just there's not really much of a chance that it fails. But a lot of cards that get spoiled are not those kind of cards. A lot of cards that get spoiled are cards that, without context, it's really hard to know. Like cards that rely on you playing spells, or cards that create clue tokens, or just a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like like one of the first cards that I ended up seeing from Oath of the Gatewatch, I think, was Kozilek. Granted,
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't through official channels. It's since
True.
he appeared very early. But regardless, trying to evaluate a card, it's like, wow, this costs 8 mana and 2 colorless. I have no idea if that's good or not. Just because without the context, you're not really getting much. So I don't actually stress about that. I really don't worry about it. I don't really try to evaluate cards all that much without, for limited at all, without seeing the whole set. Just because, like, it's hard to know. I mean, in some formats, 2-mana, 2/2 no abilities is just like stone unplayable. And in some formats, like this last one, Oath of the Gatewatch with a bunch of support cards, yeah, you would play 1 and a white 2/2 no abilities in most of your white decks. So it's hard to tell, and a lot of the cards you spoil tend to be on the weirder side. So, like, how can you evaluate like a 5-mana 4/4 with Madness, because it's going to be one of the mechanics in Shadows? I don't know. I don't know how many discard outlets there are, and I don't know if that rate is good or what the average size of creatures are, what removal looks like. So I like looking at spoilers, and I think it's cool, but I tend not to worry about how they fit into Limited because you don't have that information.
Yeah, I echo all of that. I tend to go into Magic fan mode.
Yep.
Like I get excited about these cards and I look at them, but I realize that, these pieces aren't going to come together, and it's a exercise in futility to try to put them all together without the whole pieces of the puzzle in front of you. All right, crack a pack. Now, Luis, this is our last Oath of the Gatewatch crack a pack. Are you sad?
I'm looking around to see if there's any Oath of the Gatewatch packs within arm's reach.
Thankfully, there's not, from what I can hear.
There are not. Also, I want to note that it kind of blew both of our minds that this was the Sunset Show week.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, we were doing our normal, like, Monday, brainstorming for topics email. And, I mentioned some stuff, and then you emailed back. You're like, I think this is supposed to be the Sunset Show. Am I crazy? And I'm like, no, actually, that does line up correctly.
It totally got me. Yeah, we had set a topic, and then I actually had gone to play basketball, and I was on the way back, and I'm like, wait a minute. Like, I can't check this right now.
Marshall, the story works fine without the brags. You can just
What, that I played basketball? I didn't even tell you how I did. But yeah, and yeah, so here we are, the Sunset Show. These ones do tend to creep up on us. But we have to be careful about it because we did miss one for this reason. And you guys were mad. We saw it in the subreddit. He was like, hey, where's our Sunset Show? I was like, okay.
Which set was that for? Like Origins or something?
Origins, I think, yeah.
We were both like, look at these irresponsible podcasters think they can just make up their topics every week.
All right.
The topic we were going to say, by the way, was the kind of battle or Oath of Gatewatch like re-review, which I think is fine to skip because we're not using these cards anymore.
Yeah, agreed.
And I also ended up writing one for Channel Fireball anyway.
Oh,
so,
sweet.
Which is going to go up, I think, tomorrow. So if that's the sort of thing that interests you, you can check it out there. And not as a plug, even though I guess this worked there, look, 2 for 1. But more because I don't know if we even wanted to devote a whole show for that, given that knowing that, Marshall underrated Zulaport Chain Mage and then ended up playing a bunch of them is not all that useful for our next format. There are some lessons that are worth taking away that apply to all formats, but in general, I think I'm going to push for doing a re-review of the big set.
Of the main set.
That gets played with the small set. Because
that's what I think we should
more
do
relevant.
Yeah, that's much better. We'll do that going forward. It's just more relevant.
If we have resources in action.
Well, and one of the cool parts too here, Luis, is that one of the things we tend to talk about in the Sunset Show are some of the lessons learned, that kind of thing. And so if we do have something that really stands out about a card evaluation that we missed and that now we learned something from, well, we can put that in here, right? We just take the highlights of it rather than have it be a whole show. Stephen McLett, thank you for the pack. Do you think we're going to have a stupid Oblivion Strike in this thing or what?
I will lobby for, if we have Oblivion Strike, we will ignore it. So
okay, well, I just won't read it to you. You'll have to count the commons. Mighty Leap. No. Cultivator Drone.
This is a card I don't mind first picking. I don't love it, but it's not the end of the world if you do. I like the colorless deck a lot.
It's kind of the end of the world. Expedite.
This is the end of the world if you.
Yeah, that is. Sky Scourer, poor guy. Thought he was going to have a home, but I don't think it really ever came together.
No, it just was not quite there.
Yeah, I went from thinking it was terrible to thinking it might be okay to thinking it was terrible again. Elemental Uprising. This might have popped up. I picked a different card, but this is definitely one that, like, when it gets you, you're like, really? Because you just never see this card. It doesn't see much play at all.
Yeah, it's not a great card, and one I don't think I ever ended up casting the whole format. You have to be pretty bad for me never to cast it.
Yeah, I never cast it. Cinder Hellion. Solid 5-ball, but hey, how many 5s do you need? Unknown Shores. There's a card.
Yeah, it's not bad. I think it's worse than Cultivator Drone. They both kind of end up close to the same deck. The Unknown Shores I ended up liking Unknown Shores a decent amount in the like white-black allies deck that's playing 1 or 2 colorless cards. But in general, I would still first pick Cultivator Drone. Just the upside is a lot higher.
What about Sweep Away? Do you have that over Cultivator Drone?
I don't. Sweep Away ended up being a little worse than it looked. I still think the card is fine in a control deck, and Cultivator Drone ended up being a little better than it looked. I thought the card looked good, and it ended up being something like good plus.
Agree. Seer's Lantern. I like this card a lot.
This card also overperformed, but I would still start with Cultivator Drone. Again, the decks that want colorless, the Drone is just a better card. The only time Seer's Lantern ends up being better is if you just don't end up in blue.
Yeah, that's true. But that openness really matters. Let's see what else we have.
I guess my argument is that it's not really that open because something like
because a lot of the blue decks,
2/3 of the colorless decks have blue in them, if not
That's
more.
a good point. That is true. Core Sky Climber.
I think it's worse than Cultivator Drone. Core Sky Climber is like replacement level 3-drop, maybe slightly above, whereas Cultivator Drone is well above.
I have played many a Core Sky Climber.
It's
never
a great
been
card.
excited by it. Yeah. Timber Gorge. That's the red-green dual land that enters the battlefield tapped.
No, I'm just never going to first pick one.
By the way, this pack has been bad. Like right now we're on Cultivator Drone.
Yeah,
we're like putting it up against Seer's Lantern and Sweep Away. Like it's not looking great. Roiling Waters. There's a pretty sweet uncommon, though. I have to say that these are the Roiling Waters never really commanded a premium for me. Like I don't think I first picked it at any point.
Yeah, Roiling Waters underperformed a bit.
Agree.
Still a fine card.
It's a good card though.
But I think I actually am at taking Cultivator Drone first over it.
God, this is getting. We have one more uncommon and then our rare to save us. Our next one is Weapons Trainer.
Well, a red-white card. This is the 3/2 for 2 that gives your whole team +1/+0 if you have equipment.
Yeah.
I'm not taking a mediocre red-white card over a one-color card that's actually even a little better, I think.
All right, so that leaves us to the rare to save us.
Is the rare Oblivion Strike?
It is not. It is Matter Reshaper. That's the 2 and a colorless 3/2, and when it dies, you reveal the top card of your library. You can put it onto the battlefield if it's a permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less. Otherwise, you put it in your hand. I would take it. I'm taking it out of this deck.
In a colorless deck, it's better than Cultivator Drone, and it's even slightly more open because you could splash it in another deck. I mean, Matter Reshaper is not the kind of card you want to like splash since it costs 3, but it's a great card in any dedicated colorless deck. And when you play this early, your opponent's going to trade a 3 or 4 mana card for it. You're going to draw a card, and sometimes you get to draw 3 mana along with that card. I flipped Nettle Drone off the top of my deck once, and it just felt like cheating.
Yeah, that's insane. And yeah, Matter Reshaper is so pure upside when it dies too. It's just like there's nothing bad that can happen. It's really great. I guess this is appropriate that we're leaving Oath of the Gatewatch by taking an actual colorless card.
Yeah, that is perfectly reasonable.
We're paying homage. All right, so Matter Reshaper it is. And okay, so let's get into it. I want to get right into the Sunset Show here, Luis, and we'll start going through some of our normal, kind of awards, if you will. And we're going to start things off with, if you could summarize the set in one sentence, what would it be?
So the sentence I had was, know which color pairs each card belongs to.
That's really smart. Yeah. Because as we described, I even wrote a column about it. We did our an entire episode on it. Which was that it's very strange, but if you take any individual color in this set and split it down the middle, some of the cards will go into one archetype or type of deck or color pair, and the other ones will go in the other, even though they're all blue, let's say. It's pretty cool how that ended up panning out. Right.
In what they said in the sentence, it's kind of cheating, right? Because it's one sentence, but it kind of brings up more questions.
That's not cheating. That's just intriguing.
Yeah, clever. What it's trying to say is that not all white cards belong to green white, much like not all blue cards belong to blue black. And knowing where all the cards fit, because this is a 2-color format, not all the color pairs are equal, and not all the cards of each color belong to each pair of that color. So just knowing where everything goes is kind of how you solve the draft format, in my opinion. If you know which white cards are good in white-black allies and which white cards are good in white-green beatdown, then you're going to do, I think, a pretty good job of drafting the set.
Yeah, the cool part is that the delineation here was so stark. It normally, you can make these differentiations in a normal format where you're like, oh, well, this red, common 2-drop would rather be in an aggressive deck, and this, red removal spell can go in a control deck or the aggressive deck, that kind of thing. And so you're kind of making these distinctions, but here it was like very strong. It's like when you start looking at cards like Blinding Drone and Cultivator Drone, those just go in one half of that type of archetype, and some of the other cards just straight up don't. That was really interesting. The sentence that I came up with was, well, this is different. The thing that really stood out to me was how huge of an impact this had on the format. Now, it makes sense, right? We're drafting 2 packs of it. It's going to be the majority of the cards that you're playing with. But I will say that, I'm sort of trained to think of when a new format comes out that it's going to augment the previous format in some way. And this did not augment. This just blew away all of the things that we knew. And sure, there were still a few things that we could carry over about some of the interactions and how things work. But so many of the old archetypes that we drafted in Battle for Zendikar just straight up disappeared when Oath of the Gatewatch came in, that it was like erase everything and start again from scratch. And the decks and the archetypes that I want to draft in Oath have almost no overlap with the ones that I want to draft in BFC. Really, the Black-White Allies deck was the only one that, jumped out as being similar.
Yeah. It was interesting that how much of it that did switch, and how I wonder if we're going to see this more often as we see, because this is the way the draft formats are going to look from now on.
Right.
We're gonna see Shadows Over Innistrad, 3 packs of that, and then Eldritch Moon is the next set, and we're gonna get 2 packs of Eldritch Moon, 1 pack of Shadows.
Exactly.
As far as I understand it. So seeing cards like Mist Intruder and Murkstrider go from, hey, these cards are pretty good, and this blue-red Devoid deck is great, and Processors, Ingest, and Murkstrider routinely goes like 3 picks left, and that wasn't even as high a pick as Mist Intruder, which also goes 2 cards left in the pack. There's Mist Intruder. So seeing the different context is very interesting. I don't think it's going to be that extreme in most sets, because Battle for Zendikar had some very, very linear mechanics, and so did Oath of the Gatewatch, but you never drafted with less than 2 packs of Oath, which is why you never really saw like colorless get really stressed.
Exactly. Yeah. So I thought that was interesting, and something that we'll keep an eye on as we move on towards new sets, if they tend to integrate them more with what we knew before, or if they tend to reinvent the format each time. So that'll be kind of cool. Big question. What turned out to be the best archetypes? If you were to do the 5-minute rundown to a friend who was going to do a flashback draft on this, one of the things that you'd want to convey to them is what you thought were the best 2-color pairs that they should be in, and maybe some of the ones to avoid. So what were the ones that stood out to you as kind of the go-to?
I think Black-White Allies is universally going to be regarded as the best, just because it just had... You can make an all-commons Black-White Allies deck that's better than almost anything else.
Yes.
Which most formats don't have, by the way.
Yeah.
A lot of times, I know that you guys have this, I say you guys because this is one of the concepts discussed before my tenure on the show, the Prince or Pauper theory.
Yep.
And Oath of the Gatewatch, thanks to Oblivion Strike and Isolation Zone, is very much a Pauper format. You could have a deck full of Vampire Envoy, Ondu War Cleric, Oblivion Strike, and just beat anything. Yep. So Black-White Allies, I think, is the best. I think Blue-Black Devoid ended up being quite good. Just mostly heavy Blue Devoid. Blinding Drone is such a good card. So is Cultivator Drone, and Hedron Crawler was at its best here. And then Red-White Aggro, I think, was quite good.
Okay, yeah. I had Black-White Allies as the best. The other deck that I wanted to bring up was Green-White Beatdown, which I still prefer to Red-White. I still think Green-White was a little bit better. I think they're fairly interchangeable, so I'm not, trying to take a huge stand there. But I still lose to... I didn't do much making of stands either, by the way, in the format.
Neither did I.
Yeah, but I do find the Green-White deck is one I'm very happy to get, and I'm quite unhappy to have my opponent show up with. It's such an assertive, clean deck that just has no frills to it as far as mana considerations. And while we're first picking Matter Reshaper, somebody's first picking an Ondu War Cleric and a Saddleback and that kind of stuff, and they're just going to be casting stuff that affects the board immediately right now and kicking the crap out of us. So that was the other one that kind of stood out. But yeah, Red-White, good. You can totally do that. I drafted a lot of Blue-Black. I still haven't really sorted out how good it actually is, but I know I like to play it. And I had some decent success with it, I think. So that was pretty good. What's the worst, air quotes, archetype you actually drafted?
The Blue-Red Pyromancer's Assault Bonesaw deck. Basically, any excuse to get all those cards. Like, Harvest of Souls are my favorite cards, and Bonesaw was somehow it became one of my favorite cards.
I mean, remember that draft?
Yeah, it was the 6 Bonesaw draft.
6 Bonesaws.
I ran kind of bad, probably, but
yeah, terrible.
But I love trying to make these like extreme surge decks work, and yeah, they kind of did.
They rarely did. You and I played that side draft, and I killed your Jorian, and your deck just did nothing after.
Oh right, yeah, we played it. I went turn 3 Jorian Bonesaw draw card, and I'm like, yes, doing it.
Uh-huh.
And then next turn you Oath of Chandra Jorian, and my hand is just.
And your hand is just.
I had 5 slip through space in that deck.
Yeah.
I just kept cycling them and drawing more slip through space.
That was really funny, and that was one of the downsides to that type of deck. By the way, you omitted one key fact. You also slow rolled the Bonesaw. Like, you played Jorian completely tapped out, and then you looked at me as if to say go, and I'm like, I can go, and you didn't say anything, so I reached for my card, and you're like, wait. And then you played Bonesaw and drew a card.
I was just thinking of whether I wanted to play it or not.
Yeah, right.
Look, I played pretty deliberately, and you were kind of hurrying me.
I was not. I never do the "is it my turn, can I go" thing. I gave you a lot of breathing room.
Also, I do not play particularly deliberately.
Yeah. I tried to draft the worst air quotes archetype that I tried to draft, or I didn't mean to, but I fell into, was a green-white control deck.
Did it involve Zendikar Resurgent?
No, it did not. I did try that on multiple occasions, and I have found success with it in Sealed. I'll say that. That card's been quite good for me in Sealed, but not in Draft. I found it just right in between. You can play it if you want, but, I'd prefer just like to have a Birthing Hulk or something like that. But the green-white deck I drafted had defensive creatures like Fortified Rampart from Battle for Zendikar, that kind of thing. And a bunch of the like Immolating Glare, Sheer Drop, the kind of things that's like you attack me and then I get to kill your stuff. And so the whole point was to try to set up a big wall, have people attack into me, and then kill their tapped creatures or attacking creatures. And I remember the deck being okay. I don't remember how it did, but it wasn't a real thing. Like, I remember thinking, like, how the hell did I end up in a green-white control deck? This is not, the cards are not amenable to this. And I don't think I revisited that archetype after that. What funky rare did you always hope to open?
Well, I kind of spoiled it a second ago when I talked about Zendikar Resurgent, but that's the one I really liked building around. Huh? Mm-hmm. Because I liked building these like green long game decks that had tons of creatures in them, green creature control. If you've ever cast Baloth Null Zendikar Resurgent in play, your opponent, I think, is just duty bound to concede.
Oh, it's so good. I watched BDM do that once, and he was downright gleeful.
Oh, yeah. Second to that, actually, is a Stonehaven Outfitter, because that plus Bonesaws equals Skull Clamp, so...
Sure.
the other end of the spectrum. I liked both of the cards I like drafting around do say draw card on them for some reason.
Interesting. The one that really stood out to me, and I think some people will think that I'm joking here, but I'm actually not, which was Kozilek. Because Kozilek is definitely a funky rare. That card is just weird. It's also straight up draft around it. Like, you can't just jam Kozilek in a deck. You need to have colorless mana. You need to be a control deck that can go long, and you need to, have yourself set up to be able to actually cast a 10-drop creature. And I actually don't think that Kozilek's very good. Like, I think that once you resolve the card, it's fantastic, but that 10 mana is an absurd amount of mana and very difficult to actually pull off. And I'll tell you what, I've had an opponent resolve a Kozilek against me, and I just killed them. Just the next turn. They're just like, sack a Scion, do a thing, and I'm just like, cool, attack you with everything, combat trick, you're dead. And, that's the kind of thing that could basically never happen with Ulamog. But I only opened it once, but, that was what I always hope, is to see that, because I want the excuse. I just want the green light to go super long. And like I said, I only got it once. The other one that kind of came to mind was Jorian, just because... It's so built around me, but Kozilek was my pick for that one.
Kozilek is pretty sweet. Jorian is a builder, and funky to me implies maybe not the best, whereas Jorian is just like a solid good card you could first pick.
That's true. Yeah. All right, so let's touch on a couple of these. What cards were we most wrong about during the set review? What cards really surprised us one way or the other? And this usually goes to, because I find that our evaluations are usually pretty close, But then there's some cards that'll sneak under that just have this certain set of circumstances that makes them way better or way worse, in their environment. Were there any that jumped out to you for that?
No, we didn't get anything wrong.
Yeah, next category.
So the first one I actually want to mention is Seed Guardian.
Seed Guardian?
The card's good. It's still good. This is the 3/4 reach that
card's
dies
awesome.
into an XX, X and a creature in your graveyard.
Yeah.
And I think we were both pretty over the moon about it. It ended up being pretty medium. It played way closer to Giant Mantis than anything else.
That is a good point. Yeah.
It just turns out between Blinding Drone and Spawnbinder Mage as tappers, Oblivion Strike and Isolation Zone as exile, and then like the Battle for Zendikar cards that exiled, and then like Sweep Away, like the card really didn't blow me away. I thought it might be one of the better uncommons. It turns out it was worse than a lot of the commons.
It's really funny because what I learned from that was that 3/4 reach is fantastic for 4 mana, because that thing beat down pretty good and blocked pretty well. But you're right, the token part of it came up rarely, and even when it did, sometimes you just got a 1/1, which is like fine. I mean, you're not going to turn it down, but that doesn't put it into like the elite camp of one of the best uncommons.
Yeah, another one is both Kozilek's Shrieker and Kozilek's Translator. I think I'd actually just like kind of flip the two evaluations. Whereas Shrieker, the 3/2 that gets +1/+0 menace for colorless, I rarely cut the card and ended up being pretty strong whenever I played it. Mm-hmm. Whereas Kozilek's Translator ended up being pretty cuttable and not a card I was actually excited to put in my deck. So it's kind of interesting. I liked one of those a lot more than the other when I first looked at them.
Okay. Yeah, I found both of those to be whatever. Like the Translator I was happy with, but the Shrieker was fine. One of them that really stood out, Luis, and it kind of makes me sad, but it was Reflector Mage.
Oh yeah, and this one I don't think you can fault ourselves. I don't think we should fault ourselves for missing it.
No,
it's mostly that blue-white was just not a deck. You just couldn't draft blue-white.
No.
I would say most drafts didn't have a blue-white mage, and some of the ones that did, they shouldn't have. It just was very, very rarely correct to just have all islands and plains as your mana base. And as such, Reflector Mage ended up being like a splash card or a card in a niche deck, which is kind of unfortunate because it's such a powerful card.
Yeah, another one that jumped to mind was Gravity Negator. That was one that I thought looked quite solid. It was like a reasonable body with flying and upside. And I thought this is going to be, a really rock solid 4-drop at common that you're going to see in a lot of decks. And it really just slipped off for me. It's a card that I never prioritized. I occasionally ran, and it was, I'd give it a D+ now. Like, it was kind of in the category of like, sure, sometimes you put it in and it's okay. Maybe it's a C-, but it just wasn't good. It wasn't like good,
I think the problem with Gravity Negator is really just, you can attribute it to just what the format ended up looking like. Its stats didn't line up very well against the creatures that were attacking you. And blue just wasn't an aggressive deck. None of the blue decks were particularly aggressive. So it just didn't really have a place because the activated or the trigger when you attack to give a good guy flying just wasn't something you'd ever use or very rarely use. And then paying 4 mana for a 2/3 flying blocker, not very good either. So it was one of the cards that, if you threw this into almost any other format, let's just replace the colorless with let's say just cost 1 mana. It didn't cost a colorless to use. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It could be a great card, right? There are some, like if you put this in Origins or something, I think this card would have been very good, but it just wasn't very good in this format.
No, just didn't come together. All right, let's talk about some of the underrated cards in this set. What are the cards that jump to mind when you think of the cards that at least at some point, were heavily underrated?
Ondu War Cleric came out of the gates.
Oh, yeah.
I think underrated, and everyone just realized the card is great eventually.
Yep.
You put the next one on the list, I think.
No, I did not put that on the list. In fact, you put a preemptive note next to that card.
I put Bonesaw, and then the note was "Don't hate."
Don't hate. And honestly, this is me hating, by the way. That card's god awful.
Okay, yeah, Bonesaw's not underrated. I just wanted to put it on the list. Zulaport Chainmage. I do want to bring up that you claimed I would play 2.5 of these at the Pro Tour, and I played 2 and sideboarded 1, which is a story I've told before. But I think that really does show that after I was done panning Zulaport Chainmage, you're like, you're going to play a bunch of these, and then I did.
Yes, yeah, the card ended up being pretty good. It wasn't amazing. It wasn't an
auto play, and you'd only really play it in Black-White Allies, but it was a good finisher. I frequently had 2 in my Black-White Allies decks.
Yeah, me too.
Pulse of Marasa.
The note that Luis put is the green divination.
Yeah,
Which is like, where do you even get that? It doesn't even draw you 2 cards.
It draws you a card and gains you 6 life, which is like drawing you
I
a
see.
card.
So it casts a spell that says you gain 6 and it draws you a card, and that equals 2 cards. I get you.
Yeah.
Pulse was underrated, though.
Yeah, it wasn't underrated. It ended up being quite playable.
Yeah, it's a pretty decent card.
What's next?
Seer's Lantern, which you have listed as the colorless divination, really?
Well, it accelerates you, but then later in the game, once you start scrying lands to the bottom, it's like you drew 2.
Oh my God, that is a stretch. Now, I will say, though, that Seer's Lantern was a little underrated and ended up being a card I was really happy to play. I mean, I remember just straight up losing games to that card where I successfully stalled out the board and my opponent had a Seer's Lantern and I did not. And it was like, I am at such a huge disadvantage here.
Yeah, it's the kind of card that in some games is you never have time to cast it and it never ends up being good. But like you said, in some games, it just dominates the game completely.
Yeah, totally.
What's next?
You're just messing around. You have Untamed Hunger listed as the Black Divination. What the heck? It's more like the Black Mind Rot Yourself.
All right, let's move on to actual underrated cards. Next one I put down is Essence Depleter.
God, that card's good.
Essence Depleter ended up being legitimately one of the best uncommons in the set.
Yes.
Whenever there was one in play, I felt like the player with Essence Depleter was winning. I could have 3 creatures and they could have 1, and it was an Essence Depleter, and for some reason I would just feel like I was losing.
Yes, that card would draw an Oblivion Strike at the first. Like, you don't even have colorless mana yet, and they're like, kill that. Because they know that what it can do later in the game. The king gets completely out of hand. I had Prophet of Distortion on here. One of my favorite cards from the set for sure. And what a great card draw engine for the late game. But the real key to it was that you don't have to tap it to activate it. I could see this type of card being a bit of a liability where, like, it's so small you play it out. Your opponent gets a whole turn cycle to get rid of it if it's going to be good. And if it's not, they're like, sure, keep it. Who cares? Where here, you could easily set it up so that you played it and had the extra mana to activate it that turn, even in the case that it were to get killed. And that to me just made the downside so marginal and the upside so huge on a card that could just take over the late part of the game.
It is a card that I liked from the get-go, but I agree. Maybe people weren't quite as high on it.
No, yeah, we liked it a lot, but I gave it a tentative grade, I remember, because I was like, it might just be super slow, right? Like, it is slow. Another one that came to mind is Havoc Sower, which looked a lot like a Hill Giant with a little bit of upside, but man, that card, in the later part of the game, thanks to +2/+1, that toughness boost was huge, and Havoc Sower, just got the job done. I mean, the thing just got in there and tussled really well with whatever your opponent was doing. And on an empty board, God forbid, you could pump it up and have, 5, 7, 9. I did 11 damage with one of those today, like in a sealed or in a booster draft. In fact, it's on a video that's going up on Channel Fireball, and 11. I mean, like, that's out of your, random 4-drop uncommon. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, Havoc was a great card.
Unnatural Endurance was another one that came to mind. It seemed to overperform for the most part.
Well, I don't want to say I told you so, but when you gave the card a D+, I was like,
I still think it's a D+ for what it's worth, but maybe C-. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not saying this card is great. I just think that your hatred of combat tricks was letting you grade it a little lower.
I do grade combat tricks lower. I do.
Yeah.
I don't prioritize them. That's why. Like, almost any playable creature I'll take over even a good combat trick like this one. But you were right. This card is better than I thought it was even then. And then I also had Netcaster Spider, which, not an amazing card by any stretch, but it held its own. It did what you want to do for 3 mana in that color. So I like that about it. What were some of the most controversial cards?
Captain's Clause was one of them for me.
Totally. Oh my God.
It was so weird. So like the way our Pro Tour testing was, a group of us didn't meet up with the rest of the team until later, and we showed up and didn't really like Captain's Clause, and a lot of the people on our team really liked it, and it's just interesting to see where that lands.
Yeah, I have people when I'm doing my stream. I had one in a sealed deck, and I didn't even put it in my deck because this card's just like not very good unless, there may be some decks that want it. And they were yelling at me in the chat like, hey, what about your Captain's Clause? You forgot to put it in the deck. I'm like, no, I made the decision not to put it in my deck because I don't think it's good. But they were like, wow, that card's great. And I'm like, wow, really? Like, when my opponent plays that, I always think it's the other one. The good one? The good equipment, whatever. What was that one called? You know, the one that cares about the creature types? Stoneforge Masterwork?
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm always like, oh no. I'm like, oh, it's just Captain's Class? No, we're fine. I don't care. Yeah. And so I figure that, you know, my opponents probably feel similarly.
Yeah, it's a card I still don't really like, but some people do. And it is the kind of card to give it some credit, I guess, is when it does well, it looks insane. When you play a Colostri Healer, then play a Captain's Claw on an attack on turn 3 and didn't play a 2-drop, you're like, well, that's game.
Yeah, you're just way ahead. That's true.
But yeah, another one, Wall of Resurgence. I still want to say this card isn't terrible. This card is good in the right deck. I just really hated it in aggro decks, and people seem to think it was just a great white card in every deck.
I do. I think it is, and this is why it's on the list, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think Wall of Resurgence is. I think it's like a B. Like I think that card's really good.
I just really didn't like it in like red white aggro.
Yeah, that's fair. What about Inverter of Truth? This is one that
I still don't know. I never got a chance to play with the card. People who I think are good say the card is good. So that I have to some degree, you know, people listening to the show, they're substituting, you know, kind of some of our experiences and knowledge to fill in the gaps of where they don't know. Mm-hmm. We do the same thing.
Sure.
You know, when we talk to people we think are good, we use what they say to form our own opinions, and I think that's correct. One person can't play with every rare mythic in the set unless you want to do hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of drafts, which we're not going to do.
Right.
So you have to talk to people who cast an Inverter of Truth and see what they think.
Totally. And you know, the thing that I have come around to, this card is good. And the reason why is because your graveyard is almost always all spells at that point. And if you can set it up so that you're drawing, you know, 3 or 4 very good, like maybe your removal spells, like you go removal spell, Inverter of Truth with some other board state down the line, you're drawing 3 removal spells in a row, right? Like you often don't have to have the Inverter of Truth to win that game. And if they don't kill it, 6/6 flyer is absolutely dominant in this format. So nothing gets in the way. So I've come around on it, but yeah, it is a scary card and not for the faint of heart. That's for sure.
Oh yeah.
What were some
first picks?
Yeah, notable first picks. These are the type of cards that you would first pick out of a pack, and it would really kind of set the course for your draft.
For commons, Blinding Drone was one of the more notable, just because you had to draft a specific deck. Blinding Drone had a lot of implications, whereas everyone's favorite ruiner of Crack-a-Packs, Oblivion Strike, you could just take that card and just be, you know, whatever black deck I play, I'm going to play Oblivion Strike. This doesn't really tell me not all that much, whereas Blinding Drone certainly gives you a direction. The Golden Commons are another one.
Oh yeah, those are big.
When you take Cliffhaven Vampire or, you know, Void Grafter, Storm Chaser Mage, it's not like you want to first pick a double color card because of all the implications, but Cliffhaven Vampire, for example, is just a great card, so you would first pick it sometimes, and it would certainly at least nudge you in that direction.
For sure. Yep. Munda's Vanguard.
Oh yeah, that's a great one. Just the 3/3 that has cohort, but a +1 counter on each of your creatures, like that. Just you really want to be white allies once you have Munda's Vanguard.
Another one that we opened today would be like a colorless bomb. Now, Mana Reshaper doesn't fit the bomb category, but there are some that demand colorless mana, but that really repay you back for them. You know, Eldrazi Displacer, card's insane. Thought Knot Seer, fantastic. Reality Smasher, Endbringer, you know, Deceiver of Form. There's a bunch of these cards that are really good, but you need to have colorless mana. And like, if you open up an Eldrazi Displacer and you see a holdout settlement, you're taking it. You know, maybe not the next pick, but you have to get those to make that card good. Yep.
That was what the colorless cards did, and there were certainly some colorless cards that were good enough to make that commitment. Another one was Goblin Dark Dwellers, because you really want it to be better than a 4/4 menace for 5.
Yeah, than the ally guy.
Right. You do have to pay a little bit of attention to what you're drafting and just make sure you have, you know, 3 or 4 cards that it can cast.
Right. What was the biggest groan test? This is one of the more fun ones that, you know, this is the one that your opponent plays this card and you're just like, really? Come on. And what was the one that got you in that way? For this
Nissa's Judgment was the one I could think of. First of all, it's a green uncommon, just like Overrun.
God, that happened to me today. I got Nissa's Judgment today. I hate that thing.
What'll happen is you'll have like a 4/4 and a 3/3 against their 2 3/3s, and you're like, well, things are looking pretty good, even if they have a removal spell or trade, and all of a sudden your 4/4 is dead and they have 2 4/4s.
Right. And you're getting hit for 8, and you're like, come on. Like, they couldn't have had them fight That wouldn't have been too much to at least just give them. I mean, they're getting +1/+1 counters, and it's 2-on-1. You couldn't have just at least let my little creatures fight back or something. Instead, they just get thumped from above, and that's it.
It would be pretty messy to have all of your creatures with counters fight the same creature, because if you cast it, imagine that you cast it on to kill a 5/5, and you have like 2 3/3s with counters. All of a sudden, you're just like losing all your creatures. Like that would not be a particularly good design. I don't think.
You would only lose one, right?
Well, if you have all of your creatures fight their creature, then all of your creatures each hit their creature, and their creature hits all of your creatures back. It's not like a block.
Oh, there's no rules way to do these two creatures fight this?
No.
Oh, interesting. I never actually considered that. Because that happens with like Pelucranos, but they're all hitting the one thing back as opposed to the other way around. Oh, interesting. Oh, that makes sense then. I didn't actually consider that. Yeah, anyway, that card's insane. And its cousin Press into Service came to mind for that too.
Yeah, Press into Service is basically Nissa's Judgment, except worse if they're killing you. Because all of a sudden, that scenario I mentioned before, you're getting attacked by 3 4/4s now in this situation. Yep. So instead of just 2. Of course, the upside being if you live through that turn, you then get your 4/4 back. So Press into Service was overall worse than Nissa's Judgment.
Agreed.
But the turns where it was good, it felt way better.
Yeah, also, it was swingier for sure.
Also, Press into Service has a different groan test related with it, which is casting it on Magic Online without knowing the interface. First of all, I played against this card. My opponent casts it, puts a counter on my creature, puts a counter on their creature, and steals their creature. I'm like, wait, what happened? I'm like, oh, they supported our 2 creatures and then stole their own creature. Well, that wasn't a very good play.
Yeah.
Two games later, I'm casting Press into Service, and I did the same thing.
Oh no.
When you click on a card in your hand, you click on your Press into Service. What is the first thing you do? You click on the creature you want to steal.
Yeah.
Turns out that's giving their creature +1 counter. Then you click on your 2 creatures. Yeah. So it's just
because the way it works is it does it in order of what's on the card.
Yep.
And that isn't always intuitive. Yeah.
Oh no, it's the opposite of intuitive for Magic Online. So I have groaned and it's been on the other side of that.
That is brutal. The one other card that came to mind, and I'll admit it was because of Press into Service, was Eldrazi Obligator, because that's the kind of card that like your opponent can get off to a quick start, and you can just have stabilized. You think, okay, I played a 4/4 on turn 5 and my opponent's got, 2 or 3 small creatures, and then they go Obligator and you're like, oh my God. And you're dead. Like you're just dead now, right? Now you're taking 7 damage on top of the other attackers that you weren't thinking of. And that can definitely be a groan test. I mean, they do make you work for it, but still that sucks when that happens.
Yeah.
What was the most frustrating bad card to lose to? And I put bad card in quotes here because I think that most cards do have a place, in some scenarios that, you want to keep that open. You don't want to just say that card's bad and then dismiss it. But, there are bad cards in this set. And what's the ones that stood out to you as the ones that are most frustrating to lose to?
So I put down Untamed Hunger. Oh no,
that is not what I put down.
I haven't lost this card, so I guess I can't really speak to that experience.
Must be nice.
Actually, Elemental Uprising, make your land into a 4/4 must be blocked. The reason Elemental Uprising is bad isn't because it never works. It sometimes does work.
Yeah.
The reason it's bad is that if you draw it on turn 7, it won't do anything because they can just throw a 1/1 or a 5/5 in the way. They have all this choice. But sometimes you play your Blinding Drone on turn 2 and they play Elemental Uprising. To slightly rephrase a quote, which is very funny, it's you may say my card sucks, but you're the one with the Blinding Drone in the graveyard. Yeah.
That's close.
The original quote was actually this is from an old school Sigurd Escaland, a really old school Magic player who liked playing Stone Rain, and people would be like, "Stone Rain's terrible. Why are you playing Stone Rain?" It's like you may say Stone Rain sucks, but you're the one with a land in your graveyard. So, yeah.
Where is he from? Like Norway, Sweden,
something like that.
I think I met him.
Maybe Finnish. He plays poker now. So
yeah, I did meet him. I met him at the World Series of Poker. In fact, I did a draft with him. In fact, it was a couple of years ago. That's funny. Yeah. He's a nice dude. Yes,
but the reason I didn't like Uprising is because I don't put it in my decks because it doesn't work a lot of the time. But when it does work, it's actually a fine card, which is so it annoys. It works for opponents because that's not what it's supposed to do. They're supposed to draw it on turn 10 and have it do nothing.
Exactly.
Instead, they kill your good creature.
I put Untamed Hunger, and it's obvious why. I was playing in a streamer showdown against our friends from Loading Ready Run, Graham and James and everybody, and they beat the living hell out of me with an untamed hunger on a creature, and I could not beat it, and it was humiliating, and I'm moving on to the next topic now. What was the bombiest bomb, the card you hope to open in pack 1 in your sealed pool? Now,
pack 1 / in your sealed pool.
Or in your sealed pool, right. So, I have it as Kalitas, Trader of Get. I'm giving honorable mentions to Linvala and Chandra. I want to note that these are all A+ level bombs. Like there's no, this differentiation is purely for fun, discussion purposes, as this isn't a decision that you're really ever going to face. But I do think that Kalitas is the best of the 4. And the reason is simple. Of the 3 cards I just named, 2 of them cost 6 mana and 1 of them costs 4. And I think the one that costs 4 gets a huge, I think they're all pretty close on power level as well. And if one of them costs 2 full mana less, that's the one I want. So I went with Kalitas.
I'm going to use my powers of disagreement and say Chandra is actually enough better than Kalitas that
Crazy.
I think that the extra 2 mana is worth it. Kalitas sometimes just dies to all 3 different common removal spells.
That's true.
Whereas Chandra just is nigh unbeatable. I mean, look, you can construct board situations that beat any of these cards, and I think Linvala is 3rd here. Even though, yes, these are all A+, so we're quibbling over kind of irrelevancies, but
but it's fun.
That's the best part about Magic.
Yeah, so welcome to limited resources.
I think that Chandra is the best of the cards. So I think
awesome.
I think that you'd rather have Chandra.
That's cool. Yeah. For the games when you don't get to 6 mana, remember what I said, and then when you do, I agree that Chandra's better.
I just wanted to offer a more deep analysis than 6 is greater than 4. That's all.
Okay, you did it. The next is what's the best common? And we'll just go for each color here. I think we're in agreement with 4 out of the 5, and the 5th is whatever, close enough. White?
We've got Isolation Zone in white.
Yeah, easy.
Blinding Drone in blue.
Easy.
We've got Oblivion Strike in black, and the overall best common.
Yeah, no, that's easy too.
Red has Boulder Salvo.
Yeah, which I think is definitely the best one. There was another. What's the Zada's Commando is the other one that comes.
Boulder Salvo is better. No one's basically ever taking Zada's Commando over Boulder Salvo.
Yeah.
Green is the one where you can disagree, which is Stalking Drone versus Saddleback Lagak. At this point, I'm in the Stalking Drone camp, but
I've got 1 foot in the Stalking Drone camp here after having discussions with you guys. But whatever, I think they're both great.
I wouldn't firmly chastise you for taking Saddleback Lagak, but I would chastise you.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I still do think Saddleback's the best green common, but whatever.
It is very close.
Yeah, it's very close, and I think Stalking Drone's great.
So,
okay.
The best uncommon, what do you have?
I think you were correct with what you said earlier with Nissa's Judgment as being the best one. It has the most board impact of really any uncommon, and it is such a huge swing when you resolve it. It's relatively risk-free, and it's pretty easy to cast. So I think that's the best one. But I did put a list of some of the other candidates that came to mind while we were thinking about it. And when you list out some of the uncommons, there's some powerhouse cards here. Baloth Nulldrifter, Devour in Flames, just a very good removal spell. Essence Depleter, which we talked about earlier. Grasp of Darkness. Hey, if you're in a base black deck, Grasp of Darkness is amazing for that. Press into Service, maybe not quite on that level, but it does have that huge swingy aspect to it. Prophet of Distortion in the right deck. I don't think it's quite as good on average than these, but it does serve a certain purpose better than anything else. And then I do think Reflector Mage is on power level with these cards. Unfortunately, again, the blue-white made it not work. So I took Nissa's Judgment as number 1.
Yeah, I like that too, but I think Devour, Essence Depleter are both really close to that. I think the others that you mentioned are a slight step below those, but the most interesting thing about all of these is that the best uncommons are pretty close to the best commons. It's just kind of cool drafting a set where the best commons are on par with the best uncommons.
That is interesting. Yeah,
there's not a big power differential there.
Yeah, talk about Devour in Flames versus Oblivion Strike. They're fairly comparable cards, right? There's not a huge gap there. What's the worst card in this set? The biggest blank, the most last pick, the one that's just always sitting next to that land at the end of the pack.
So the card I hated the most, and the card I thought was the worst, was called the Gatewatch, the Tuna White Circle Planeswalker. Yeah. I will admit, if you have a Chandra in your deck, you can play this card, so it's not like it's the worst card ever, but the fact that the vast majority of people who ever saw this card had no reason to even consider playing it was what annoyed me. Yeah. I think Iona's Blessing or Untamed Hunger might be the actual worst cards in the set, just because they're just so bad, and they match up so poorly in a format where there's a lot of good removal.
Bonesaw.
No, not Bonesaw. Anyway,
no, I actually don't think Bonesaw is the worst card in this set. I think the one I had was Hedron Alignment.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about Hedron Alignment is that in the blue control mirror, it's not unreasonable to board this.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. I'm going to say Untamed Hunger out of spite. What card was the most begrudgingly playable? I had Alpha Protector, the 1/4 Vigilance. It's like, okay, fine. I need a stupid ally. I need a 3-drop. You're in.
I had Kozilek's Pathfinder.
Oh, that's a good one.
The old Sutcliffe, as people call it.
No, that's not what that is.
I've heard it now on 2 separate podcasts. So,
are you saying I'm begrudgingly playable?
That's true. That wasn't the category I put you in. I would play this card sometimes when I have enough Cultivator Drones or Seer's Lanterns or Hedron Crawlers, but never pick up an actual finisher. Yeah, 5/5 still can finish the game.
Okay. Yeah, I ended up. I think that's a great one for that. I'm gonna skip this next one. What about the Marshallist card or the LSVEist card?
I have Pyromancer Assault for myself.
Oh, for sure. That's just deeply LSV.
Yeah, I think that it's just pretty clear that a card that gives you a relatively minor payoff for trying to draw a lot of cards and putting a lot of air in your deck, and
specifically
really
a red enchantment,
and really isn't worth all the setup cost. Yeah, that's right up my alley.
Right up your alley. Obviously, Reflector Mage is the one that's the most Marshallist for sure.
Yeah, most because it's a mana war and you're just apparently like that just all you, and then also because it's just a fringe playable and it doesn't really fit the format. So like,
which is also all me somehow.
like blue white doesn't really get what's going on. Like it's just
I went from being begrudgingly playable to now not really understanding what's going on, and it's just kind of here,
not fitting into the format.
This is not working out for me. What's Marshall's Soapboxiest card is the next. None of these. I didn't have one that really stood out, but like there were a few. Weapons Trainer was one. I was always kind of like, why are you here, Weapons Trainer? Like you gave us no, and Stoneforge Acolyte along those same lines. It's just like it felt like there was this weird equipment sub theme in the deck that just didn't exist, or in the set, and there just wasn't any good equipment. But we had these weird payoffs for having equipment, and I remember thinking on the shows being like, I'm confused by this, and there's not another set after this, so we know it's not. I mean, maybe it's a plant for something down the line, but it's not, not for here. And I always felt like that was kind of weird.
Definitely.
What card do you still have to read when someone casts it against you? For me, it's Consuming Sinkhole. Because like they'll blow up something, or most of the time they just hit you with it. But when they hit a creature, a land creature, it's like, wait, can that hit land? Like, what was that again? It's like, oh. What does it do? It destroys or does 4 or whatever to like a land creature or some weird wording like that I'm always like, I have to read it again to make sure that I get it sorted out in my head.
Well, because I've actually ended up doing coverage of a bunch of events, one of the responsibilities I take on whenever I'm going to be in the booth is just
so brutal.
Is knowing what all the cards do. So
you're just going to high road this one. There's just no so brutal.
I was just speaking for myself.
There's also nothing here. Like you didn't even write anything down. You clearly planned this out.
I'm not speaking for anyone else. I'm only speaking for myself and what I feel comes as a responsibility. So,
way to take a stand. What was your most drafted card on Magic Online?
Unsurprisingly, I think based on our earlier conversations, Cultivator Drone, because it fits the categories we always talk about for most drafted card, which is a card you like a lot that goes in the deck you draft a lot, and a card that's not just a windmill slam first pick, because how did you get so many?
Right, because everybody else takes them too.
I got Cultivator Drones with 4 cards left in the pack. That wasn't a completely uncommon occurrence.
Right.
And I
what mine was? Mine actually, it says a lot. Mine was Vampire Envoy.
That is interesting, because that is a high pick card.
That means that I fought, like that I took those higher than basically anything. Right? I mean, that's because that is a card that other people want as well. So I apparently valued that one even higher than the average person, which is already quite high. So yeah, I don't know how that happened. I probably just didn't pass a whole lot of them. All right, this is one that I like to aim at you, Luis, as a professional game designer and longtime Magic player. From a design and development aspect, how did the set fare? How were the mechanics? What were some of the wins, the losses, when you play this set out, and then maybe think about some of the underlying things? What stood out for you?
A lot of the set was solid. It was definitely less strange than Battle for Zendikar.
Yeah.
Because Battle for Zendikar was one of the strangest sets that we've seen. And I think that looking at all the different themes and mechanics, it wasn't that far from what you'd expect of like a normal set. So like Cohort, for example, the Cohort decks played pretty well. I really liked that most of the things that you thought were going to be allies were allies. It was way less dissonance than there was in Battle for Zendikar, where Stonehaven Medic, the 1/3 that taps to gain a life, or
right.
the Course, the Kitesail Scout, the 1/1 flyer, just weren't allies, and that's very surprising to me. But in Oath of the Gatewatch, most of the small white creatures were allies, and a lot of the red and black creatures were allies. Obviously the Eldrazi weren't allies. That was very apparent when you look at the cards. So there weren't that many confusing cards like that. I mean, Relentless Hunter or like Gladeheart Cavalry, like there were some oddballs that weren't allies, and that's just like, that's kind of weird. But for the most part, it was just like, if you think it's going to be an ally, it's an ally, and I think that's an improvement. Cohort did lead to a lot of you just saying go with all your creatures untapped, which I actually don't think is great, because people don't like figuring out combat math when their opponent has 5 creatures untapped, 3 of which have activated abilities.
Okay.
So
it can get overwhelming for
yeah,
players.
It's just like board style games and games where you have to figure out a lot of different blocking configurations are not the most fun, if that's what happens all the time. But the boards didn't always stall either. So
yeah, I think that's why we saw some of the allies in the set be low toughness.
Yeah, so they're less good at blocking.
Right. So you can't just, have a bunch of, we always said that we wish that Zulaport Chain Mage was like a 2/4 rather than a 4/2. And I think there's a distinct reason why that isn't the case, right? And that's why you also see cards like Core Scythe Master, which is a 3/1 while blocking rather than, a pretty good attacker with First Strike on the other end of it. Yeah.
I really liked how the colors theme actually came out.
It came together good, didn't it?
It did, because I thought it's like, wow, can you really like take these cards that you need to draft the lands for? That sounds insane, but it actually worked out quite well.
Yeah, they did a good job.
There were enough colorless sources, both in terms of the lands, like, the Wastes, Unknown Shores, Holdout Settlement, all the Battle for Zendikar lands, and in terms of Hedron Crawler and Cultivator Drone and Seer's Lantern, that you could... I basically never ended up drafting a colorless card and not seeing the lands I needed to play it. Sometimes the deck wasn't open, so I ended up moving out, but I never was like, I just need to cast the Sunburner, and I just didn't see any wastes. Like, that just didn't happen. But you also didn't get them for free, so it did cost you something, and you had to prioritize getting them. I liked how it played out. I thought colorless was pulled off quite well.
Super subtle, too.
And that's a tricky one to pull off.
Yeah, that's really tricky, because, like, you look at some of the cards we talked about earlier, the Blinding Drone was somewhat obvious. Hey, a tapper, we don't get those that often. But, a card that I mentioned, Havoc Sower, another one that you and I both liked, Essence Depleter, right? These are the ones that getting those numbers, how much it costs to activate them and what you get for it, getting those just right is the difference between a card that ends up being kind of busted and a card that is balanced but worth the investment that you have to make it work, which is picking the lands, upsetting your mana base, and then finding the lands within the course of the game. And God, I think they really just nailed those down. I really do. Like, they could have put one notch down on basically any metric on Havoc Sower and made it really like, why do I want to go for this? It's not worth it. But they put it just to the point where it's like, this is worth it, but not overwhelmingly so, where everybody's just scrambling to get Havoc Sowers and the lands to activate it. I thought that was really, really smart how they developed those cards.
Yeah, I really like colorless. Support was fine. It's not a particularly complicated mechanic, but it plays well. It was a little, it was unfortunate when you had a Saddleback and you didn't have a 2-drop, but just prioritize drafting 2-drops, and you can't always have the perfect draw, so that's fine.
Yep.
Surge was a cool mechanic. It didn't actually get there as a deck, I didn't think. I thought the Surge deck and the Surge cards ended up being not a very good strategy, but, that's fine. Not every theme or mechanic has to be really good. So I don't necessarily think that it's a failure if it's Surge not being a tier 1 draftable deck doesn't mean that Surge isn't a cool mechanic. The Surge cards did feel pretty like moderate in terms of rate. Like, you had 4 mana draw 2 Surge, you can play it for 3 mana, and you 5 mana 3/3 flyer Surge, you can play it for 3 mana. It's like 3/2 menace that you can play for 2 mana if you Surge it. It was I think that it's like, wow, this is a cost reduction mechanic. Let's not be too aggressive on this, and that's kind of where they ended up. So I wouldn't expect cost reduction mechanics to get pushed in general. It's just hard to do that because those go wrong so easily.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
so
one
it makes
mana
sense
difference on any of those, and all of a sudden it's busted, right? Like,
right. You don't want to end up with another Delver deck, right? Like, what if the Sphinx, the 3/3 flyer, comes out for 2 mana, the Royal Avenger, and all of a sudden, like, people are casting Gitaxian Probes into those in Modern. Maybe that wouldn't happen, but
still, like, that's a very touchy space to
and certainly, like, comparative analysis, if it was 2 mana draw 2, if you surged, like, all of a sudden, like, Storm decks might play it, or there could just be decks that use this in a way that's not great for you. So I think that it makes sense why Surge is, like, every card with Surge that could have been, like, either 3 or 4 ended up at 4, or could have been 2 or 3 ended up at 3, I think. Like, if you had to, if you had to look at the different costs. So I understand why that is, and as a result, it's not a deck that I thought was particularly great in draft, but it did come together sometimes, and it was fun when it did. So that, overall, I liked where things ended up in Oath of the Gatewatch. It wasn't a format that I drafted like 50 times. It did not very many formats are though, so it is interesting to me what crossed that threshold. Like Battle for Zendikar was, and it's weird because when I looked at Battle for Zendikar, there were a lot more things that I didn't understand, like, that were confusing or seemed strange. It was definitely very weird, but the gameplay, I think, was just very good. Whereas Oath was a little bit more upfront, and the gameplay wasn't bad. I enjoyed playing the Oath tournaments I played at, and I enjoyed drafting it. I still draft it on stream and whatnot, but it didn't grab me the same way. So it's kind of interesting trying to figure out why that is.
Yeah, I ended up drafting it a lot. I still draft it today, and I've been playing a lot of Sealed for it. So yeah, to me, this is just like very solid set. I think they did a very good job from top to bottom. It will not break my top 5, right? It's not going to be an all-timer for me. But if it came back, I would probably check it out and draft it again. And it's held my attention from beginning to end. And that's about that to me is awesome. Like, that is a very, very solid job. And I think that they should be quite proud with how things worked out here with the format. What did this format teach you? What were the takeaways from the format? I know for me, was going back actually to what we talked about earlier in the set, was that, sometimes the second set is going to augment the first, and other times, like in this case, it will redefine the set completely. And the thing that I want to know now is, since this is the first of our 2 set blocks that we're going to be going to now, is that question that we asked earlier, which is it just going to be like this now, that we draft triple of one set, and then when the new set comes out, it's like, scratch all of that stuff that you thought you knew, this is completely different? Or is it going to be that sometimes the second set is more of an extension of the first, and you'll see a lot of the same mechanics and a lot of the same feel and a lot of the same things with just different twists on it, or maybe taken to another level further? And that's my takeaway from this as we transition, in a big picture into these 2 block sets is, or 2 set blocks, I meant to say, is, what should I expect, right? When we go to, what did you say it's called, Eldritch Moon? When we go there, what, should I be erasing everything I knew before, or should I be augmenting? And that's the thing that really stood out to me about this, and that I'm going to be keeping my eye on going forward.
I think in general they'll connect more than Oath and Battle did. Oath and Battle both just had these themes that, again, they're very insular, right? They're parasitic. You have the processor ingest, like, pairing that. Take a processor card and put it in a random format. Does it do anything? No, it doesn't. No, you add Mercstrider to almost any limited format you can imagine, and it's a 4-mana 3/2 with no ability, because just like, how do you exile a card? You have to actually go out of your way to do that. And Battle for Zendikar did. The card was fine in Battle for Zendikar. Add 2 packs of the Gatewatch to the format, and all of a sudden it goes back to being a 3/2 vanilla, even though there are a couple ways to enable it. It still just didn't happen very often. That, I don't think, is going to be typical. I think that Shadows is going to have a lot, or is just likely to have a lot more themes that carry on through the second set, just because most themes, if you look at all the themes of every set, in the past 5 years, and you put them all on a whiteboard, and you try to separate them into very linear and less linear, then most of them would not be that linear, right? Like, support is not particularly linear. You can put support in any set, it'll work fine.
Yep.
Just every now and then there are cards and themes, like the ally theme, for example, which did carry over, by the way. Allies work perfectly fine in both sets.
In fact, they carried over the most out of any of the mechanics.
Right.
Yeah.
But like, colorless was also a theme that like just only appeared in Oath of the Gatewatch, and there were no cards in Battle for Zendikar that specifically required colorless mana because that hadn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
So you draft these colorless enablers, and sure, they help you cast colorless cards in Battle for Zendikar, but they don't really give you that extra bonus of activating them when no other card would. So I think most sets are just not going to be that way. Most sets are going to synergize a little bit more. It's not necessarily a guarantee, and they don't have to. This format played fine, as we just said, but overall, most sets aren't going to be as strange as Battle for Zendikar, and that's where I think the biggest disconnect was.
Okay. Favorite card of the format, Luis?
Kind of ended up being Seer's Lantern for me.
Wow, Seer's Lantern. Huh?
It's not the best card. I'm not this.
This is
powerful,
favorite. Yeah.
But I really enjoyed playing a Seer's Lantern, and because of the advantage it gives me in the late game, knowing all I had to do was just work on stabilizing my life, and eventually I'd lantern them right out of the game.
Just light it up, huh?
the slowest, worst card advantage machine you could ever imagine.
Oh, that is suit you. You know what my favorite card was? It's not Reflector Mage. I know a lot of people would assume that would be my favorite one, but it was Prophet of Distortion. That was the card that I had the most fun playing with. That's the one I wanted to see the most. I'll tell you what, if Reflector Mage was in a playable color pair, it would have taken it. That card is awesome. And the few times that I did splash it and play it, it was excellent, and it felt really nice. But I got to say, I think if I want to play Reflector Mage, you got to head over to Standard and battle with it there, because in Limited, it was Prophet. That was the card I wanted to see. That was the one I got excited about if I got past, second or third pick and maybe had a blinding drone, and I was like, ooh, this is going to be a fun draft. This is going to be really cool. And that was it. That was the one I liked. All right. So that's going to do it for the Sunset Show. Let's move on to our official previews for Shadows Over Innistrad as we start to switch our focus to that next set and what's going to be going on there. Now, in this case, we have 4 preview cards, Luis. So let's just get right into them. They're all in common. The first one is called Obsessive Skinner.
Looks like a bad dude.
Yeah, and that is a face I see, right? Yeah, that's a face. Yeah. So this is a human rogue for 1 and a green, and not a very nice person. When Obsessive Skinner, it's a 1/1. When Obsessive Skinner enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, which I think is pretty cool. And then it has Delirium, and Delirium cares about if you've got 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard. So it says at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if you have Delirium, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Each opponent's upkeep.
So this card at the base is a 2-mana 2/2, which is good.
Yep.
And I don't know how easy Delirium is to get. This is one of those, going back to our listener question, actually, it's like,
yeah, who knows?
Is Delirium on 10% of the time? Is it on 70% of the time?
Right.
My guess is somewhere between those two. But yeah, how easy is it? Like, obviously, there are going to be ways to get artifacts into the graveyard. There are, are there going to be ways to start? So are there going to be ways to get artifacts, enchantments, creatures, instant sorceries? Like, what are the relative ease of all these things? Creatures are kind of a gimme, but the rest, who knows? So I think that how good this card, and also the other ones, because we've got Delirium on all these creatures.
That's right.
Actually, it's really going to be a function of that. It's interesting that because we're previewing these 4 uncommons with Delirium, you can imagine there's a lot of cards with Delirium. So I have to assume it's a somewhat supported thing, which means there are probably like random enchantments and artifacts with sacrifice costs that really help you enable these cards. So kind of interesting, and I'm going to assume that Delirium is kind of on for them.
Okay. Yeah. The cool part about Obsessive Skinner for me is the early game, late game thing. I love cards like that. And I'm assuming that this kind of has that 1/2 punch. So we'll see. Next is Manic Scribe. This is the blue one. 1 and a blue for a 0/3 human wizard. And when Manic Scribe enters the battlefield, each opponent puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. And then Delirium, at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, they mill 3 cards.
So what this has a couple implications. One, there's a mill theme. We've already seen a couple cards with mill, and this is just another one. So milling your opponent out seems like it's a real thing, especially if this is on. It mills them for 3 immediately, then every turn thereafter.
Yeah, that's pretty fast.
That is a very fast clock. The other is that all the mill cards I've seen so far only target your opponent. I'm afraid self-mill is dead.
Okay, well, hey, don't give up yet. There's still other cards to come. Interesting to note here is
self-mill is dead.
You, you.
I
The
have
interesting
concluded.
part about Manic Scribe, though, is that you know if you are going to mill your opponent, like you could be turning on their delirium pretty easily if
Oh
there's
yeah,
any
that's a
other
really good
graveyard
point.
stuff. It's like that could backfire pretty quickly on you too. So we'll see if Manic Scribe holds up. The red version is called Gibbering Fiend, and it's 1 and a red for a 2/1 devil. And when it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Minor note there, it will do it to each opponent in 2-headed giant. That's 2 damage instead, whatever. And then delirium, it's the same thing. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, it does 1 damage to them if you have delirium.
It's a decent little beater. I mean,
It's okay, right?
2-mana 2/1 pings them for 1, and then late game. Again, this is the early late game stuff, right? An aggressive deck is happy to put this in their deck just because 2-mana 2/1 that pings them for 1 is fine. And then if you draw this on turn 8 and you have delirium, you just play this and they have to deal with it because it just starts pinging them every single turn.
Yeah, this is the kind of card I don't like to see on the other side of the
Oh yeah.
battlefield.
It's also kind of funny that all these cards trigger on your opponent's upkeep, which means they don't have very much time to deal with them.
Right. Like, interesting to know on the Manic Scribe, if you already had delirium, you play it, mills them for 3, you say go on their upkeep, they get milled for 3. Like, that's 6 cards immediately. Like, so maybe even if you turn on delirium for them, you know, they don't get much of a chance to take advantage of it. Our last one is white. It's called Paranoid Perish Blade. It's 2 and a white for a 3/2 human soldier, and it's got delirium. Paranoid Perish Blade gets +1/+0 and has first strike as long as you have delirium met, again, which is 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard. So it's a 3/2 for 3, but then if you've got delirium, it's a 4/2 first strike. I don't know. I tend to go along the line of assuming that delirium is something that you can get. You've got a 3/2 for 3 in the early part of the game, which is okay. It's not great, but it's okay. And then in the later part of the game, it becomes more relevant body, but becoming a 4/1 with first strike. Card seems fine to me.
Yeah, 4/2. Yeah, it's a fine card. If you want a 3/2 in your deck, I mean, the way to rate a lot of these cards, and this is where Manic Scribe probably fails the most, is would you play this card even if you rarely got Delirium? The other 3 cards you probably would. They're solid. And Paranoid Perish Blade seems like a reasonable inclusion in most decks. And when it has Delirium, you play this on turn 3, maybe you get a hit in, maybe you trade off, whatever. But if you draw it later, or you can just wait on it till later, it becomes a real creature. 4/2 first strike is pretty hard to deal with. So
that's it's really tough to enter combat with cards like that.
I'm looking forward to trying to manage Delirium. You know,
yes,
just try to figure out how to obtain it and how to keep it.
Yes, and we will be talking, of course, a lot more about Delirium and all of the other things happening in Shadows Over Innistrad as we start to move in that direction here on Limited Resources as well, and work our way up to the big set review show coming in a lot closer than you might think. It's coming up soon, so that'll be really cool. Good, so that's going to do it then. I want to remind you that the show is brought to you by channelfireball.com. Go over there, check that out. You know, you can find Luis's article that he wrote about the re-review when that goes up. And again, draft videos for those of you that like to watch those and try to improve. You can watch any number of other videos and read articles and such over there from some of the great minds in the game. And while you're there, hey, pick up the cards you need, singles, sealed product, whatever it is that you need, they're going to have it at channelfireball.com. Okay, that is going to do it for this one. If you guys want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR. Come say hi on Twitter. Luis is LSV. You can email us directly at lr@lrcast.com. And you can find everything related to the show on lrcast.com. Right on the front page, I've got kind of a hub there for everything, including our streams. You can come watch Luis and I play live and interact with us, say hi. We both stream a few times a week whenever we can. You can find the Facebook page if you like to be notified when new episodes go up right away. You can like the Facebook page and it'll send you a message. You can find our YouTube channel where you can find all of the shows that we do in video form. Now, I don't have any accompanying graphics or stuff at the moment, but that's something that we're looking at doing down the line. And you can at least just listen to the show. If YouTube is an easier way for you to subscribe or to get it, you can find it there. And the Patreon, everything, it's all sitting there right on the front page of lrcast.com, along with every episode ever of Limited Resources and the blog where you can find the crack-a-packs for every show. You can vote for yourself what you think we should have taken in the pack. And sometimes I'll write up some articles. For example, you can see the pictures and the cards themselves for the ones that we got to preview today for our exclusive preview cards. All right, that's going to do it. Thanks a lot for hanging out with us, and we will see you next week.
So, Marshall, I don't know if you're aware, but I used to, before I joined this podcast, produce an episode every week of Magic TV.
I am aware of that. And
one of the things I miss from Magic TV is doing a top 8. We used to do a top 8 every week, which is, on a very wide range of topics. Top 8 card draw spells, top 8 planeswalkers, top 8 cards that shouldn't have been printed, etc.
Yeah.
And, so I want to do a top 8 this week.
Oh, sweet.
It's a top 8 marshals.
What?
There are many, many cards with the name Marshall. And
okay.
I want to do a top 8 of them.
All right, let's do it.
All right, so number 8 is Stern Marshall.
Is that a real card?
2 and a white for a 2/2. On your turn, before you attack, you may tap Stern Marshall to give any one creature +2/+2 until your turn. So, okay. Stern Marshall is most commonly seen in Portal or when I'm late for recording limited resources. Number 7 is Goblin Marshal. This is 4 red for a 3/3 Echo, which means you have to pay its casting cost again on the next turn. Otherwise, you sacrifice it.
Doesn't sound that great.
When it comes into play or is put into a graveyard, put 2 1/1 Goblin creature tokens into play. So okay. Goblin Marshal saw some play with Goblin Lackey back when there were fewer good targets to put into play.
Okay, and so you end up getting 4 tokens.
Yeah, you get 4,
even if you don't pay Echo. Or if you don't pay Echo.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
Yeah, okay.
But most frequently these days is seen when Marshall gets to a buffet.
That's like with an apostrophe.
Next is Field Marshal. This was more of a limited standout, but you can still build a deck around it. It's 1 white for a 2/2 human soldier. It says other soldier creatures have +1/+1 in first strike.
Ooh, so showing my great leadership skills.
Yes, so something along those lines.
That's what you were going to say, right?
We'll go with that. Field Marshal is a decent inclusion, and it's one of the rare sightings of Marshal in the outdoors, I guess.
And that was a number 5?
That was 6.
6, okay.
Number 5 is Seasoned Marshal. This is 2 white for a 2/2. Whenever it attacks, you may tap target creature. This is a beating in draft. You had a 2/2. But it could tap down their biggest creature, so it was so easy to set up good attacks.
While attacking, I like that.
Seasoned Marshal, most commonly seen when Marshall spills salt all over himself. Next up is a kind of strange card, but it's more recent. Marshall's Anthem. This is 2 white enchantment with a multi-kicker, 1 and a white. Creatures you control get +1/+1. And for each time you paid the multi-kicker, you return a creature card from your graveyard into play.
Yeah, that card's a beating.
Yeah, so I have to ask you, though, what is Marshall's Anthem?
Oh, I don't know. I've never thought of it. I don't have an anthem.
Not a very good answer. I'm going to go with the LR theme music. That could be Marshall's
Okay,
Anthem.
Yeah, sure. I like that.
The next card saw a lot of actual pro success. Oh. So that begs its inclusion on the top 8 Marshals list. But it's Remotion Sky Marshal. It's 3 white for a 3/3 flying rebel. And it has 7 tap. Search your library for a rebel card with converted mana cost 6 or less and put that card into play.
So it's basically Eye of Ugin?
It's Eye of Ugin, but the reason this card was good, it looks ridiculous, but Rebels was a tier 1 constructed deck. It was a tier 0 construct deck. It was just the best. And you could search for Ramosia. You go up the chain. Each Rebel has an expensive activated ability that gets a more expensive Rebel into play.
Okay.
And this was the 5-drop Rebel that could get your 6-drop, the Joval Queen, which is a 4/7 Vigilance. So,
and how high did it go? Was 6 the top?
Yeah, 6 was the top end.
Gotcha.
As far as I remember. But yeah, Ramosian Sky Marshal was actually a major. Judging from the picture, I can only assume it's Marshall skydiving.
I'm looking at the picture right now, and yes, either flying or skydiving. I will accept either.
Well, if it was Goblin Marshal, it would be sky falling. But next up at number 2 is Skirk Fire Marshal. And this is 3 red for a 2/2 Goblin. Protection from red. Very weird. 5 mana 2/2 protection from red. It also had the ability to tap 5 untapped goblins you control. Skirk Fire Marshal deals 10 damage to each creature and each player.
What is going on? That's a weird card.
This was sometimes a sideboard card in Onslaught Block Goblins, I believe. And it was a very odd card, and I can only imagine that this is what happens when Marshall hosts a barbecue.
I do tend to everybody.
And then somehow, looking through this entire list of marshals, the most playable and most played marshal is Mog War Marshal. This is 1 and a red for a 1/1 with Echo again, and this is actually very clearly like kind of like a riff on Goblin Marshal, but one and a red for a 1/1 Echo, and when it enters the battlefield or dies, put a 1/1 red Goblin into play.
Yeah, it's like a mini one.
So I don't know what. I guess I would just leave it without commentary that Mog War Marshal is the best marshal of all time.
Hey,
so
you didn't even put Dauntless River Marshal on there. Did you do that on purpose?
Marshal after he's gone for a swim? I didn't put marshaling the troops or marshaling cry on there either. I don't want to be too harsh and get marshal and cry.
Yeah, you don't want to see that.
So again, without commentary, Mog War Marshal is your number 1 marshal, and the list as follows goes: Stern Marshal, Goblin Marshal, Field Marshal, Seasoned Marshal, Marshal's Anthem, Ramosian Sky Marshal, Skirkfire Marshal, Mog War Marshal, Marshal.